Good evening, Germantown. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, a business session for Monday, May 11th. All aldermen are here, present and accounted for. In a few moments, we'll do a quorum call before we start. The agenda has been presented to the public earlier in the week. The first order of business is call this meeting to order. We have just done that. We proceed to item 2 on the agenda this evening. The invocation. The invocation will be led by City Administrator Patrick Lawton. Mr. Lawton.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Heavenly Father, in our hearts we plan our course, but we pray that you establish our steps. I pray that we seek your face for advice. Let us not make decisions based upon what we know, but let us act based upon your wisdom. Please guide us, Lord. We place this meeting in your hands. We place our hearts and our minds in your hands so that you may direct us. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Lawton, for the invocation this evening. That brings us to item 3 on the agenda, statement regarding meetings that are held in electronic format. Let me read this statement into the record. All local governing bodies in the state of Tennessee have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Germantown is no exception. In an effort to carry out its governance and operational responsibilities lawfully and effectively, while also considering the protection of public health, safety, and welfare, the Germantown City Administration has taken steps to conduct Board of Mayor and Aldermen and other public meetings electronically. These actions were taken in response to Governor Bill Lee's Executive Order 16, reaffirmed recently in Executive Order number 34, which suspended the requirements of the Tennessee Open Meetings Act to the extent necessary to allow governing bodies subject to the act to meet and conduct essential businesses by electronic means. The Germantown Board of Mayor and Aldermen has determined that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its citizens in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Further, notice of such electronic meetings has been and will continue to be published in the same manner as is currently used for regular meetings. The public is also and will continue to be able to view the agenda and have live access to the actual meetings by electronic means by logging into the Germantown's webpage and by clicking the appropriate link. Video recordings of the meeting will be made available as soon as practical after each meeting on the city's website at www.germantown-tn.gov. These measures are temporary and are due to expire no later than June 30th unless further action is taken by Governor Lee. With that read into the record, I'd ask the city clerk to get a quorum and call the roll, please, clerk.
Alderman Sanders.
Present.
Alderman Gibson.
Here.
Alderman Massey.
Here.
Alderman Owens.
I'm here.
And Vice Mayor Yonda.
Here.
Thank you, clerk. A quorum has been established of all 5 board members present, including the mayor as well. Prior to setting the agenda, let me just remind the board a few things on this agenda and is traditional in our meetings, whether they're electronic or in person. Just a reminder to the board that during board discussion, please remain germane to the agenda item as we normally do. Also, please make sure to submit any questions through the chair, specifically for department heads, if that arises during discussion. Please refrain from referring to colleagues by name. A good example of such would be during discussion, just simply to say a colleague earlier in discussion mentioned, or refer to a person as my colleague opposed to using a surname. It keeps things from being personal and adds to decorum as well. And fourth, please, when you do not have the floor, please mute your microphone so that there's not any background chatter. Also, the quality of the video can be affected by the number of people on a particular call or the amount of broadband use being used in an area. So with those things said, let's move to item 4 on the agenda, set and establish the agenda for this evening's meeting. The agenda was produced and sent to the public Wednesday. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
Move to approve.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
So a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
I'd like to offer an amendment, Mayor.
Sure.
I'd like to ask that the board consider placing items 7D and 7F on the regular agenda for different reasons. I'm not opposed to item 7D, but I was contacted by several employees at the library and would just like to let them hear a little discussion about this contract and make a comment prior to our vote.
Sure.
And,
Alderman Sanders, the agenda is more of a procedural matter. For instance, if we had a school group in attendance and wanted to get them moved in front, it's more procedural. I think it'll be appropriate when we take up the preliminary agenda to offer that amendment at that particular time, and do so again at item 7 on the agenda, if that would be okay.
Okay, but if we wanted discussion on 7F, for instance, rather than voting on that as a block, that's what I'm asking.
You can request for it to be removed for discussion.
Okay, well, that's what I was doing. I was asking both of those
Sure.
items to be removed for discussion.
Sure. Do so, and when we come up to the preliminary agenda, since that's where those items are. It was properly moved and
Mayor,
seconded. Yes.
Mayor, I think we've always allowed the items to be moved at this point of our meeting, so I'm not sure why we're not going ahead and taking a vote on moving that to the regular agenda now. Seems like that.
Sure, Alderman. As I just mentioned a moment ago, I will repeat. Setting the agenda is largely a procedural matter, and it has to do with the order of things on the agenda. As an example, if we had something to the form of acknowledging a teacher of the year, or we had a proclamation, or perhaps another item that an alderman said, could we move this up to item 3 on the agenda so that that person or that group could be accommodated? The preliminary agenda stands on its own, and we'll be glad to welcome any amendments to the preliminary agenda at that time. That would be the appropriate time to do so.
Well, Mayor, we're also amending the regular agenda in doing that because Alderman Sanders is asking to have those items moved to the regular agenda. So you are amending the agenda. And like I said, we've done it this way since I've been on the board. So I'm not sure why procedurally we're trying to do something different now. Why don't we just take the vote and let it be moved from the preliminary agenda to the regular agenda like we've always done in the past?
Yeah, well, I will not be argumentative with you. I believe we have done it in this fashion as well. And so if it would please the board, what was the item again that you wanted, the 2 items?
7D and 7F.
Without objection, we can move those items to the regular agenda. They will be items 11 and 12. Are there any objections? Hearing none, it was properly moved and motioned, and an amendment was brought forward. There was never a second on the amendment. Can there be a second at this time?
Second.
Second.
There is a second by Alderman Gibson on this particular amendment. Please call the roll on the amendment, clerk.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes?
Alderman Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Alderman Yonda.
Yes.
Thank you. The amendment carries. If we could move to the original motion on the floor, please call the roll.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes?
Alderman Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
and Vice Mayor Yonda.
Yes.
The agenda has been adopted for this evening. That brings us to item 5 on the agenda. approval of the minutes. This is the minutes from the regularly scheduled meeting held on April 27th, 2020. Those minutes were presented to the public. And is there anyone who would like to make any modifications or corrections at this time?
I have a modification, Mayor.
Sure.
On the item under setting agenda, I made an amendment to setting the agenda at that time, and I motioned to postpone item number 9. It failed for a lack of second. That is not reflected in the minutes.
That adjustment will be made. Thank you for pointing that out. Any other adjustments or modifications?
Yes, Mayor.
Yes.
I think it needs to reflect that incorrectly states that I was absent. We all know that's not true. I was in attendance, but it was muted and I couldn't get it off mute. And I think the minutes need to indicate that I was present but muted.
And what part of the where in the minutes are you referring to?
Both in setting the agenda and the approval of the minutes.
Thank you. Those modifications will be made. Any further modifications?
Mayor, there was also a discussion that occurred relevant to the city attorney's recusal, and I don't see any of the point of orders that were raised or questions that were directed to the city attorney, and it seems like those should be reflected in here because I believe official motions were made. So I would like to have those reflected in here as well.
And which particular items are you referring to?
It's going to be on the discussion about the cell tower, Mayor. The regular agenda. The development contract number 1228, final site plan approval for the Dogwood Elementary School new cell tower.
Okay, sorry, I'm reviewing as you're talking as well.
Sure, it reflects that Alderman Nowens recused himself. It does not reflect that Mac McCarroll recused himself due to his relationship with the applicant, which was a company affiliated with Tower Ventures.
Sure, I'll tell you what, we will, in light of some of those changes, we will formally, let's see, our city attorney, obviously, Attorney McCarroll, let me ask you this question quickly. We can pull the minutes and have them presented at the next meeting. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Administration will not make the request, but we will pull the minutes from this meeting and make a proper adjustments and modifications as mentioned earlier and resubmit those at the first meeting in June. Thank you so much for those clarifications. Much appreciated. That brings us to item 6 on the agenda this evening, citizens to be heard. Clerk Betty, do we have any citizens to be heard report?
Yes, Mayor, the city received one submittal, but the individual did not follow instructions for citizens to be heard.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So just for the record to reflect, one without the appropriate following of directions. That brings
Mayor,
us to... Yes.
Mayor, what instructions weren't followed? And the reason I'm asking is it might be helpful for other citizens to know what they need to do in order to get something approved.
Sure. Clerk Betty, I think I recall that as well. I don't think there was name, address, phone number, anything included in the submission. Is that accurate?
Mayor, all that was received was an email address.
Okay.
But no personal address to show they were citizens or phone number, etc.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the inquiry, Alderman.
Thank you.
Again, that leads us to item 7 on the agenda, the preliminary agenda. Let me go through that quickly. Preliminary agenda consists of the following items. Item 7A, acceptance, amendment, amended Germantown Performing Arts Center bylaws. Item B, agreement Tyler ExecuTime annual software as a service. Item C, change order number 1, repair and cleaning of wells number 2, further investigation of wells number 3 and number 8 at the Southern Avenue Water Treatment Plant, and preventative maintenance and testing of all wells and high service pumps. As mentioned earlier, item 7D was requested and subsequently removed to the regular agenda and will be item 11. Item E, proclamation for National Public Works Week. Item F, again, as mentioned earlier and requested without any objection from administration or the board, professional services agreement, elevated tower design and inspection was moved to item 12 on the regular agenda. Item G, purchase outdoor pool house HVAC replacement. Item H, sewer easement, Kirby Parkway Professional Condominiums Association Incorporated. And the final item, item J, sewer easement, Westminster Properties LLC. Is there a motion to accept the preliminary agenda as amended?
Move to approve.
There's a motion by Vice Mayor. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. I'm not sure. I heard two voices. Who was the first voice? I heard Alderman Gibson, but who else?
Alderman Sanders.
Alderman Sanders, I think, beat you by a nose, Alderman Gibson. So that's the second. All right, thank you. Please call the roll.
Alderman Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders.
Yes.
Thank you. The preliminary agenda has been approved as modified. That brings us to item 8 on the agenda this evening. Item 8 is resolution number 20R04, a resolution to adopt a continuing appropriation and budget for fiscal year 2020. Mr. Lawton.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the board, and good evening. The charter for the city of Germantown regarding the city's budget requires that the city administrator present to this body 45 days in advance of the end of the fiscal year and the beginning of the new fiscal year a budget. And it also identifies the things that need to be contained within the budget. And trust me, there is nothing more I'd rather do this evening than to present to you on first reading the FY21 budget and operating and capital budget for the city's 5-year financial plan for fiscal year 21. Unfortunately, however, the situation we find ourselves in does not allow me to do so at this time because of the devastating impact this global pandemic has had on our national, state, and local economy. With the notable exception of property taxes, we anticipate at least between now and the end of the fiscal year and going into FY21, a 30% drop in other revenue streams, and this would include such things as state shared taxes, local sales taxes, and a variety of other taxes such as court costs, fines, and fees. And keep in mind when I mentioned that, court has been closed for the past 6 weeks. Altogether, this would be about a 40% drop in revenues for our current budget. And without revenue trends that I and my staff can rely on, we simply can't put together a budget for the Board of Mayor and Aldermen at this point in time for you to consider, particularly not only the revenue portion, but on the appropriations themselves for the various departments that we have and capital and infrastructure replacement projects based on the trends that we see and our inability to do any forecast. The state sales taxes and the local sales taxes come to us 30 days in arrears. So the month of April, for example, which we were basically closed with the exception of grocery stores and some essential services, if you drove around town, you noticed a lot of vacant parking lots. Other sources of revenue besides property taxes, we refer to these as elastic taxes. They ebb and flow with the economy. And with the rapid deterioration of our sales tax base and other forms of elastic tax revenues, this is far worse than what we saw in the recession, because we had a timed approach with the recession. We identified it early on. We saw it coming. We could adjust to its impacts. This has happened so quickly and with such devastation. It's very difficult to see any kind of trend, and therefore to make any kind of accurate forecast and projection for our community, and certainly for you as local officials to make the proper decision and the right decision regarding the level of services for our community and the things that our residents have come to expect. And so the state statute under TCA 6-56210, there's a very simple statement that allows for local governments to pass a continuing appropriation resolution that would have the FY20 budget that was properly vetted and approved with all the hearings and the public input become the spending plan after July 1, 2020. Our anticipation is that prior to October of this year, as we look at trends that we can see during the month of July and August in all of these areas, the possibility of stimulus dollars coming forward in the form of direct grants to supplant lost city revenues. We don't know what those are going to look like yet. We will present a budget to you at that point in time. We will begin the FY20 budget. We started the budget in January, but we will begin again in earnest with the Finance Committee in June and July, and hope to be in a position to present to you during the month of late July or August and September a proper budget that you can vote on. And even at that period of time, depending on the results of the pandemic and its impact on our local economy, right now we're in a phase 1 opening. But if we should slip back to, and not make the phase 2 gate and slip back to a phase 1, it's going to have an impact on everything overall. And quite frankly, none of us have a crystal ball of what that looks like, but I can tell you it's had a significant impact on the city's budget. We anticipate closing the FY21 budget in the black. We've made significant changes to expenditures between now and the end of the fiscal year. This body itself, I believe it was last meeting or the meeting before, where we canceled a number of and rejected a number of bids for certain capital and infrastructure replacement projects, particularly the ones that were going to hit the general fund. We will get through this crisis. We've always done an excellent job in providing you with a sound financial plan for the current fiscal year and during the 5-year planning period. We, staff, my office, we just need a little more time to be able to present to you solid estimates as best we know them at that point in time, and then also the appropriations to support the level of service that our community has come to expect. So the administration recommends the adoption of Resolution 20R04. One other thing I might add, we've had several meetings with the Financial Advisory Commission leading up until this point. And in April, I think it was April 21st, April 7th, we had a meeting with the Financial Advisory Commission, reviewed the status in terms of what the financial picture was looking like. And at that time, and every one of those members agreed and supported the concept, how difficult it is to make projections in their line of work. The administration did not present at that meeting an amendment or a motion for a continuing budget resolution. We discussed it, but it came up from a member of the Financial Advisory Commission, received a second, and had unanimous support. Mayor, that's my report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions rather that the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton, for the presentation. Much appreciated. Is there a motion to adopt resolution number 20R04, continuing the amounts set in the FY20 appropriations and budget until the FY21 appropriations and budgets is adopted? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
There's a motion by the Vice Mayor. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by Alderman Gibson. Vice Mayor, would you like the floor?
Yes, I think this is definitely a fiscal responsibility that we need to move forward with. There were several suggestions that we start doing 90-day moving budget. I'm not so sure that's important. I believe these few months will allow us to get a handle. A budget is just a guideline. Just because we have the money in there doesn't necessarily mean we're going to spend it. We sort of are in sort of a expenditure lockdown right now, in my opinion, keeping no travel, etc. This just allows us to legally move forward with the budgeting system that we had for FY20. And I'm very confident that our finance director and our budgeting team will have us together, hopefully by September, sooner, obviously, if we can get it. We have sort of a guideline of what's going on with 21 anyway, but now we need to make sure that we know what we're doing. I appreciate it very much if you would support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Alderman Gibson, would you like the floor?
Thank you, Mayor. Just simply to say that I think it is important that we take a 90-day pause on this for us to be able to get a good read on what the economic impact of COVID-19 is going to do. As Mr. Lawton said earlier with the elastic taxes, that we just don't know what that impact will be. It's not an immediate read on that. And so I do support this resolution.
Thank you, Alderman Gibson. Further discussion?
Mayor,
Yes, Alderman Massey.
It's my understanding that with this budget, the mayor's administration can choose to extend the budget without the necessity of us actually adopting a resolution. So I'm not sure why we're going through the exercise of having the aldermen vote on this. I mean, it's your office that hasn't presented the budget, and I don't see why we as a body have to actually adopt a continuing appropriation and budget for fiscal year 2020. So what is the purpose of going through the exercise?
Thank you, Alderman. I will ask Mr. Lawton or our city attorney if they'd like to weigh in on the rationale for having a resolution brought forward and having legislative support.
Mayor, I'll address that. It's more than just an exercise. This resolution means something, and state law, it supports what's in state law, number one, in the state statute, and our ordinance as well. And you couple that with the fact that we were to bring forward a budget. I just think this is the type of documentation that this body needs. Furthermore, the comptroller would like to see this type of action as well, as opposed to any type of or any indecisiveness on the part of this body in not recognizing that we need to move forward. So this will be sent to the comptroller's office, in addition to a letter from myself and the mayor explaining what this body did and why we did it.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. You continue to have the floor, sir.
Yeah, the mayor, as I see it, the problem is that we don't have the information that's going to be sent to the comptroller that the city administrator says justifies this action. I'm not saying that he's wrong. I'm just saying that I think it would be more appropriate for the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to do our due diligence and actually see that information before we take a vote that will then precipitate the letter that's going to be sent to the comptroller's office. I mean, we don't know what is going to be sent to the comptroller's office. And so this vote tonight is essentially a rubber stamp, if you will, of something that the mayor's office wants done without providing much justification for it. And I'm not trying to attack the mayor's office or anything like that. I'm just stating factually that we don't have any information upon which to determine whether or not we should support this resolution tonight. If the mayor's office wants to not submit a budget to the board, then the process of having a continuation of the fiscal year 2020 budget is what's going to take place. But I just don't understand. I don't see the need for us to take any action on this, quite frankly, particularly since we haven't been given any information.
Thank you, Alderman. I'll just quickly state that, and the city administrator can chime in. The letter of the comptroller will simply be the resolution with a cover letter saying that we have requested an amended budget and that we would submit a permanent budget at a certain point in time in the fall, unless there would be more concrete with that. Mr. Lawton?
No, Mayor, that's exactly right. The information that would be going to the comptroller is in front of the board. And without this type of documentation, it's not responsible for us to simply move forward with the 20 budget without notifying the comptroller's office by proper action from this body that this is our intent, this is what we plan on doing. We are to submit a budget to the board, to the state by the beginning of the fiscal year. They won't have this. This has to, well, the board can vote how the board wants to vote, but this needs to take place and should take place for proper documentation and to inform the state that a division of local government under their watch, we are creatures of the state, is taking the appropriate action to move forward with the continuing budget resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. That's 5 minutes so far. As further discussion on this particular item, floor is open.
Yes, Mayor.
Yes, Alderman Sanders.
Thank you. One of my colleagues mentioned they thought it was proper to take a 90-day pause, but I don't see a timeline in this resolution. I also did contact the city administrator, and he indicated it was his intention to try to have a budget presented and approved, if he can correct me if I'm wrong, by a third reading by September the 24th. So would the administration have any objection to putting that timeline in this resolution?
I would be hesitant to put that specific date just simply because we still have a certain amount of unknowns. Now, that is a very good target, and I believe we want to get to before October 1, but to put a date on it right now, I think would be not wise. City Administrator?
I would agree, Mayor. One of the things we're up against and we're working on is to make sure we have the property tax set as well for the bills that we will be, or the notices rather, that we will be sending out in mid-November. So it's important to have a tax rate set before then so we can get things processed. I hope it falls in those lines, but of course, none of us expected to see what we're seeing today in a matter of 2 months, what's happened. I think it's too soon to tell, to put a specific date on. We are going to do everything we can as long as we have the information in front of us to be able to present you with a budget that you can act on. There's nothing more that we want than to have a budget, a financially sound budget as soon as possible. But we just,
and I would just add, thank you, City Administrator. I would just add that it would be paramount that we are able to review the fiscal year in sales revenues. And so those they're in arrears by 2 months. So I think the guide point we're looking for is being able to see March, April, May, and June's numbers so that we can see what how the city reacted from partial shutdown to full shutdown to partial reopen to some other form of reopen. Those months will give us enough, I think, information and data to make, instead of making a guesstimate or an estimate, we could have more of a sound foundation to bring forward a budget that we could all live with. And correct me if I'm wrong, City Administrator, you have been in conversation with the Comptroller's Office and MTAS on this procedurally.
yes, sir.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. You have the floor, Alderman Sanders.
Thank you. And hearing that discussion, I'd just like to go on record saying I don't support us looking at increasing our property tax rate. I hope we could find appropriate cuts to avoid doing that at this time. But we shall see when you present your budget. Also,
Well, I don't want to be premature, Alderman, but I would concur with your sentiments. Go ahead.
Mayor,
thank
if
you.
I could interject as well. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
quickly.
Alderman Sanders. That's the last thing we would be proposing. You talk about an economic downturn and what that might do to small businesses and homeowners. A property tax increase is not responsible, and we will not be presenting that to this body.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and Alderman, I would just, and I'm sorry, your time here is precious, I know that, but we don't want to make statements like you've probably heard city leadership in Nashville let their community know that they should expect huge increases in property taxes. That's not what we're doing here. We want to be sound and secure and cautious. You have the floor, sir. You have
Thank
about
you.
a minute and a half.
Great. One of the previous speakers also indicated that we're in sort of a lockdown at this time, curtailing some spending. So could you please let the board know what are we doing in relation to our expenditures? And if we look at continuing with the 2020 levels, does that also include limits on, I'm assuming CIP projects that expire at the end of this year do not carry into that next year by this resolution, and IRP programs? Can you tell the board about that, please?
Well, you would be correct. You know, you did in last meeting did not sunset, actually voted against projects moving forward. City Administrator, if you could wrap that up in about 30 seconds would be great.
Yes, Mayor. So one thing to keep in mind, you know, we're in the fourth quarter of the fiscal year, so a lot of the major expenditures have already been made, major capital and things. But there were things within our control that we could cut back on to balance the budget by year's end, including a lot of the infrastructure replacement programs and projects we put on hold or moved those back. We looked at cuts throughout all the operating departments. We looked at cuts in terms of general fund transfers to states today, for example, all those areas where we could preserve our reserves. And at least what we presented to the Finance Committee in April, we're gonna hopefully, if things don't continue to deteriorate, present for the balance of FY20 a balanced budget because of those measures we've made. Now going forward with the continuing budget resolution, you know, it's just because that's what was approved last year. Myself, my staff, all our department heads, finance folks, there will not be an expenditure made for anything besides just typical overhead and operating expenses without it going through procurement, through the finance department, and through my office. We're putting a hold on all of those spendings, all that spending during that period of time before an FY21 budget is adopted.
Thank you, City Administrator. That concludes the time on the floor for this particular alderman, and thank you for your good decorum as well. It's much appreciated. Any further discussion? Alderman Owens, would you like to have the floor?
Yeah, please. Thank you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
I'd just simply say I was able to partake, or at least to witness, the Financial Advisory Commission meeting that was streamed, and I agree with several of the sentiments from those commission members. I would say that I believe there's certainly justification and that it is appropriate to have some type of short-term delay to get an accurate estimate on what we're dealing with here, what the economic realities of COVID-19 are going to be for our city. I am comfortable with the resolution that the administration has brought forward and that has been favored by the FAC, and I would move to approve it.
Thank you, Alderman. Further discussion?
Sure, Mayor.
Yes, Alderman Massey.
Back to my original point, to my colleagues, I mean, there's no reason, there's no, in my opinion, legal reason for us to take this vote tonight, other than to give the appearance that we support what the city administrator has recommended. You know, if we don't approve this, then the mayor's office and the city will continue operating under the 2020 budget. You know, it's my contention that we haven't seen the numbers that the city administrator is working with, and that he should be obligated to provide that to us as stewards of the taxpayer dollars so that we can decide whether or not we want to make immediate changes in expenditures, for example, to the budget. And it may be something that we need to discuss among ourselves, but to simply take the recommendation from the city administrator so that it appears that we're all on board with his decisions and the information that he's reviewed. I'm just uncomfortable with that because I don't think that we've been given sufficient information to make an informed decision about whether this is the right course of action for the citizens of Germantown. I think that this should be postponed at a minimum so that we can let the city administrator, encourage the city administrator, give him some incentive to provide us with some minimal numbers, because we haven't been provided with much of anything. And I know some of it's difficult and there's moving targets, but let us see all those moving targets. Now, the mayor said he doesn't want to present a budget because it'd be a guesstimate. You know, he doesn't want to move forward because it might be premature somehow. But in my opinion, it's a guesstimate on our part. It's premature on our part to simply say that we're going to pass this resolution so that the mayor's office feels better about not presenting the numbers to us in the normal budget process. And I don't want that to be perceived as an attack on the mayor's office. It's not. I just think that it is prudent for us to withhold this sort of approval until we've been given the information that we need to make these decisions.
I'm sorry, further discussion? Please call the roll.
I have just, I'm sorry, Mayor, I had to unmute.
Go ahead. No problem. I had mine on mute as well. Alderman Sanders.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers to my previous questions. They were basically framed to give the public information about how the city's proceeding forward that it didn't appear in this discussion. So I thank you all for doing that. I think I had one or two more questions before I ran out of time. So I know several of our other municipalities have moved forward with the budget, and the city of Memphis also, and also the county, which those two have quite complex budgets. So I'm asking one more question, I guess, to the administration is, what is different in Germantown, or why are we taking a different approach than say Memphis or the county or the cities that surround us?
Sure, Alderman, City Administrator, it's my understanding, but it has not been confirmed. Some of our sister cities in this region are looking at continuing budgets as well. But again, that's not confirmed. We've talked to some of their city administrators, but go ahead, Administrator Lawton.
Sure, Mayor, and you're exactly right, Mayor Palosola, that my peers across the county, I'm not quite sure what they're going to do. We identified this early on. If things continue, that this would be an option, particularly the language in our charter and in the code of ordinance, in the state statute. But one thing I would say to this body, Germantown's financial position is the envy of local governments across the state. We do budgeting correctly. We do long-range financial forecasts. We just don't adopt a single year budget at a time and hope that things are going to be better in the following years. I think this is the prudent thing to do. We're the only city in the county and one of only two in the state with a AAA bond rating. And that doesn't happen by accident. It's because of solid financial planning, being prudent, how we manage our resources, being proactive, putting in place the proper forecast models and trends and projections. I'm not saying that our other cities across the county don't do that, but that's what we do. And it would not be proper for me, given all of that and my tenure with the city and the city's strong financial history, to present to you anything less than that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You still have the floor, Alderman.
Thank you very much for that answer. Since April 7th, when the FAC had met, have there been any other meetings with the FAC, or do you have any currently scheduled? Have they had further discussions to help you continue with this budget process? Or I'm certain the cities continue to try to develop one despite presenting this resolution to us. I don't think you've just been sitting around, but have there been any other FAC meetings, and do we have any scheduled currently?
Thank you, Alderman. Mr. Lawton?
Mr. Mayor, no, we do not. We have not had another meeting with the FAC. Have we kept them informed on what we're doing, and particularly this action? Last week, we sent to the FAC this agenda sheet and the continuing appropriation resolution after the board had received their packet. We want to make sure that you all had it first. We have had numerous meetings internally regarding the capital budget and putting together an internal calendar to try to hopefully meet that end of September deadline. We are proceeding with the expenditure side of the budget in anticipation that it will not be business as usual. We are looking at the possibility of perhaps some federal funding that might come to the local government level, and how we might be able to use that. Yet another reason for this continuing budget resolution. There may be some additional dollars coming from the federal government here in the next 2 to 3 months that we can budget for probably more capital expenses, but the work goes on. Yes, sir, to answer your question.
Well, and we will have future FAC scheduled meetings to look at the budget that will eventually be presented. Is that accurate, Mr. Lawton?
That is correct there.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders, Alderman, you've got about 20 seconds.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I did hear what my other colleague said, but I believe hearing what he said and knowing that he is correct, we could move forward and simply a budget not be presented, and we'd be in a continuing resolution anyway. So I think I'll be in support of this tonight.
Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Massey,
I'll abstain.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes.
Alderman Gibson.
Yes.
Thank you, board, for the support. The resolution is adopted, and we will get the information to the comptroller and begin our working toward an FY21 budget. That brings us to item 9 on the agenda this evening, ordinance number 2020-2, year-end budget adjustments, first reading. Mr. Lawton.
Mr. Mayor, members of the board, our finance director, Adrian Royals, will make this presentation.
Thank you. Director Royals.
Thank you, Mayor. Even with the continuation budget in place, the FY20 budget will end on June 30th, and the audit will then take place on September 1. We will go into the continuation budget and then eventually into the FY21 budget. With that being said, this item is to approve ordinance number 2020-2 on first reading, and to set June 8th, 2020 as the second reading and public hearing at the end of the fiscal year. Each year it is necessary to adopt year-end budget adjustments in order to avoid budget and fund overruns. The first item is with regard to the ambulance fund. With COVID-19, the ambulance fund has been impacted both in revenues and expenditures. After a discussion I had with the fire department, April's call volume was 30% down. The Medicare reimbursement has also been delayed by at least a month. And with those items, we are seeing an impact to the revenues. Also, they have had to buy additional expenses for medical supplies. And so what we're asking for is an additional $125,000 to be added to the transfer from the general fund to the ambulance fund. At this time, we will continue to watch that. I don't anticipate that needs to go any higher. And if we see that we do not need to send over the full $925,000, then we will not do that. But we can't go over what is set by the budget. So at this time, we're asking for the additional 125 so that we will have enough budget as the COVID-19 continues or we get better numbers on that. The second item is for the cash balance plan. Employees that are in the cash balance are asked to contribute a certain percentage of their salary. And if they are not vested at the time they leave the city gives back the employee's portion back to them upon leaving. And so that is what this item is to give back that money that the employees put in after they left the city, but before vesting. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Royals, for the presentation on each particular item on the agenda item this evening. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 2020-2 for year-end budget adjustments on first reading and to set Monday, June 8th, 2020 for second reading and public hearing? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by Alderman Gibson.
By nose.
By nose, you're correct. And I think the same two participants were in that race. Vice Mayor, would you like the floor, sir?
Not really. This is just of course, I always worry about increasing the budget, but the ambulance service is getting hit pretty hard at this point. So it looks good to me. We need to move forward with it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Alderman Gibson, would you like the floor?
No, thank you, sir.
Okay, floor is open for discussion. Please call the roll.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes.
Alderman Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey.
Yes.
The agenda item passes and moves to a public hearing set for Monday, June the 8th, 2020. Thank you, Board, for your support. That takes us to item number 10 on the agenda this evening. Ordinance number 2020-4, Germantown Municipal School District year-end budget adjustments, first reading. Mr. Lawton?
I believe Ms. Royals is going to do this. Adrian, correct? Or I can? Your call.
Yeah, that's correct. I'll do it.
Director Royals, please.
All right, thank you. This item is similar to the previous item in the fact that the school board also has year-end budget adjustments that they need to make. So this item is to approve ordinance number 2020-4 on first reading and set June 8th as the second reading and public hearing. I would like to add that I spoke to the finance director for GMSD, Kevin Jones, spoke to him today. He has approved these items. Superintendent Manuel has also approved them, and they have all been approved by their school board. I am happy to answer any questions if I can.
Thank you, Director, for the presentation. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 2020-4 for Germantown Municipal School District year-end budget adjustments on first reading and to set Monday, June 8th, 2020 for second reading and public hearing? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion by Alderman Gibson, a second by Alderman Owens. Alderman Gibson, would you like the floor at this time?
No, thank you, sir.
Alderman Owens, would you like the floor?
No, thank you.
The floor is open for discussion. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes.
Alderman Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens.
Yes.
The motion and agenda item carries. We move to second reading set for Monday, June 8th, 2020. Thank you, Board. As mentioned earlier, we go to item 11 on the agenda. If you'd like to go ahead and turn in your books to the preliminary agenda, item 11 this evening is item D, contract amendment number 3 and extension number 3, library services agreement. Mr. Lawton.
Thank you, Mayor. This agenda item requests approval for an amendment to the city's contract with LSS to reduce our contract costs associated with the library when it was closed during that period of time as a result of the pandemic. It also requests authorization to extend our library services agreement with LSS for 1 additional year through June 30th, 2021. This extension is the final extension with LSSI under this contract, where the board had approved an initial agreement for a period of time and then 3-year, 1 month year extensions at the city's option. The details of the cost adjustments for the current contract and the extension have been provided to you on attachment 3. As you know, our library continues to be the gold standard for libraries in our region and beyond, and LSSS continues to provide excellent service to our community. Mayor, I won't go through the background. The board is aware of it. Going back to 2004 and our relationship with LSS. Yes. Now, I probably think what's most significant about this is the amendment. And Ms. Pieper and I discussed with the LSSI representatives that with the library being closed, there ought to be some type of reduction in library services. And you see that in the amendment. Going forward with the new contract for July 1, 2020, if we see the COVID expenses continue, or if we have to close the library for whatever reason, we will be able to go back and discuss and negotiate with LSSS. What does that lack of service, for lack of a better term, mean in terms of our contract? They've been very good partners in trying to identify the rest of this contract period, the reduction, and then what happens going forward on July 1, 2020. Mayor, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton, for the presentation. Is there a motion to approve contract number 3 to account for any adjustments that need to be made due to the extension of safer at home orders and continued closure of the libraries, and to extend the existing library services agreement with LSS Incorporated for the period of July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2021 in the amount of $1,413,182. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
There is
Second.
a motion. There's a motion and a second. Was that Alderman Owens' second?
Sanders.
Alderman Sanders, thank you. My apologies. Alderman Gibson, would you like the floor?
Just briefly, Mayor, just simply to say, I believe Mr. Lawton said that our library is the gold standard, and what a treasure we have in that library. Specific to some of the considerations, I think that staff has done an exceptional job to make certain this week right now we have curbside delivery for books. They've worked very hard to make sure that whatever online products could be placed there for the users to be able to utilize that during this pandemic. I know that in having conversations with our library director, I know that they are not at this time considering adjustments to salaries. I believe that Alderman Sanders had indicated that was one of the concerns that he had, and I apologize, my colleague.
Thank you.
Yes, one of my colleagues had mentioned that was a concern, and I know that they are not considering that at this time. So I will be voting in support of this agreement.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Sanders, would you like the floor, sir?
Thank you. I'd echo the comments of the previous speaker, that the excellence we have in our library, and thank the board for supporting moving this to the regular agenda. Just so I could make a couple of comments, I did receive some anonymous letters in the mail to my mailbox at City Hall from someone or folks that purported to be librarians with our library, asking me to look into the salary and wages that they are paid. I did meet with the library director and showed him the letter and discussed that with him. I also talked to our procurement department today, and that is just something that this board, the aldermen, are not involved in setting the salaries of our librarians. That is up to LSS. We, by way of this contract, we provide money for acquisitions and operating expenses for services that they provide, and that is strictly up to the service provider. So since it was an anonymous letter, I have no way to let those people know that I did check into that and looked into it for them. And I understand the position you're in, but I wanted to let you know we looked at it, and I do support this extension. And thank you again, board, for supporting and allowing me to just make those comments.
Thank you, Alderman. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Sanders. Alderman Sanders.
Yes.
Alderman Gibson.
Yes.
Alderman Massey.
Yes.
Alderman Owens.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Yonda.
Yes.
The agenda item passes, and the administration does appreciate the support, and so does the library as well. Thank you. That brings us to item 12 on the agenda. Again, as mentioned earlier, item 12 is the former item F on the preliminary agenda. If you'd like to turn in your book to item 7F, Professional Services Agreement, Elevated Tower Design and Inspection. Mr. Lawton?
Mayor and members of the board, I could make this presentation, but we do have our resident expert with us, Department Head, Mr. Bo Mills, and I will turn it over to Bo for the presentation and make any comments that I need to or any additional staff members. So, Mr. Mills.
Thank you. Director Mills, please.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Board, the purpose of this agenda item is to seek approval of a professional services contract with A2H Incorporated for engineering, design, and construction inspection services in the amount of $233,800 for our elevated water tower. For 40 years now, our city's water master plan has called for a second elevated tower out east to build in the resiliency and redundancy that our city's water system desperately needs. You, Board, have taken steps over the past 2 years to accomplish this needed infrastructure improvement. So based on that direction, in October of last year, we began the process of reviewing qualifications from engineering firms for design, specification, compliance, and construction inspection services for the elevated water tower to be built just east of the Popper Pike Forest Hill intersection. A2H, their written proposal and their subsequent interview set them apart as the most qualified engineering firm for this work. A2H has proven themselves on water system design work throughout our region and for their stellar work on the city's particular projects, that being the water main in Forest Hill south of Poplar Pike, and of course with our Forest Hill Elementary and GMSD district office design and inspection of those buildings and facilities. Our utility fund reserves, which were not expended for CIP work in the latter part of FY20, are being requested as the funding source for this professional services work. The engineering design work is needed at this time to complete the planning work that's necessary to take into consideration the need to coincide with the timing and planning for the wild property plan development. Construction of this project using utility bonds is anticipated later when the bond market is more favorable for an issuance of this sort. And our Forward 2030, our strategic objective 2 in natural resources in the key performance area calls for us to have continuous investment and to be responsible in management of our most valuable natural resource, our water and our water system. Mr. Chairman, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Director Mills. Mr. Lawton, would you like to make any concluding remarks?
No, Mayor, but available for questions, as is Mr. Mills. Thank you.
I think, please highlight where the funding is coming from. I think that may be somewhat, not unclear, but needs some clarification. General fund or utility fund?
It's coming out of the utility fund, and it's coming from, as Mr. Mills mentioned, this was to be a bond issue for both the design and the construction of the tower, but accessing the capital markets at this point in time is not advisable from what we've seen and based upon our financial advisors. However, there is a project in the CIP this year in the utility fund reserves that we will take a portion of those dollars and fund the design portion of this only.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton, for that clarification. Is there a motion to approve a professional service agreement with A2H Incorporated in the amount of $233,800 for engineering and construction inspection services related to the design of an elevated water tower? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion by Alderman Owens and a second by Alderman Gibson. Alderman Owens, would you like the floor, sir?
Sure, I'll be.
Thank you.
Am I on mute? No, I'm unmuted. Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I'll be fairly brief because I believe we've had a great deal of discussion about this project, and I want to thank Bo Mills for his continued updates. We've heard about this in meetings. We've heard about this in a work session, and I thank him for keeping us informed along the way. I was actually, quite frankly, Mayor, I was getting a little concerned about my, I guess, perceived lack of movement on this. I'm anxious to see this project move forward. I do believe firmly that this is a public safety issue for our residents. It is paramount that we get this done, to have that fluidity or balance of the two water towers. And so I don't have too much to add about this. I know that the timing is important, that we get this design project moving so we can continue with the planning. And so I would reach out to my colleagues and I would ask them to support this as well, because I think we can all agree this is a paramount safety issue. And so I would request that they consider voting along to approve this as well.
Thank you, Alderman Owens. Alderman Gibson, would you like the floor, ma'am?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate my colleagues' sentiments. I echo those. And I would also just like to make note that with this being, I know in our preliminary agenda, there was a proclamation about Public Works Week. And so we have our resident expert, past president of the American Public Works Association, and Bo Mills. And Mr. Mills, I appreciate your presentation. I do agree with Alderman my previous speaker.
Thank you.
Speaker's comments about the need for a second elevated tank, and we'll be in support of this.
Thank you, Alderman Gibson. And just on an aside, Director Mills, we're going to miss this year's cookout, but we'll do it next year, I'm sure. Further discussion on this item?
Yes, Mayor.
Okay, Alderman Sanders, you have the floor, sir.
Thank my colleagues for allowing this to be moved to the regular agenda just so we can make some comments on it. And you briefly touched on it, Mayor, a moment ago about the funding. We had just passed this resolution and telling our residents that we need more time to put a budget together because we don't know about revenues. And this budget or this agenda tonight, we're approving almost $2 million. It's right at $2 million. So they're concerned and wanted to know. But I just wanted to point out, as you briefly did, that this project, the money from this $233,800 would be coming from the utility fund, and the sales tax, hotel tax, liquor tax, none of that tax that we're concerned about losing or having a deficit of goes into the utility fund. So I just wanted to be able to let the public know that this expenditure really is not affected by the COVID situation that we're seeing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Sanders. Further discussion?
Mayor.
Yes,
Okay.
Alderman Massey, go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure that it's fair to say that the COVID situation won't have any impact on our utility fund. I mean, you still have businesses and people that are possibly not contributing as much to the utility fund. So it is possible that the COVID crisis will have a negative impact on our utility fund as well. But in my opinion, this is a project that could be postponed. I've been on the record as opposing the water tower in that area from the beginning. But today, in the environment that we're in, with the uncertainty about our budgetary issues, I think that it would be something that would be appropriate to postpone rather than spending this amount of money to proceed with the professional services for a tower that we're not real sure when we're going to get constructed. And the other thing is that we don't know that the businesses and apartments that were planned in that area are even going to go forward with their projects due to the economic downturn. I mean, there is a possibility that those homes won't be built in that area, that those apartments won't be built in that area, and Forest Hill Heights won't develop as it was planned to develop. And so this water tower may, in fact, turn out to be unnecessary. I think the public safety issues could be addressed in other ways. I think there's alternatives to this water tower at this particular site. So I'm going to oppose this, and I wish we could actually postpone this and not even have the vote on it tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Any further discussion?
I have one further thing, Mayor.
Sure, Alderman Sanders.
Just in response to my colleague, I did look back at the budgets and the CAFR, for instance, and I believe I may be a little bit off. Maybe if I am, our finance director can correct me, but I believe we got around $7 million in cash in the utility fund. So I certainly agree that we shouldn't be bonding this contract, and that it should be spent out of reserves. So I just wanted to make that comment for what it's worth.
Thank you, Alderman Sanders. Any further discussion?
Mayor, just a
Yes.
point.
Yes, go ahead.
Just would like to dispute the remark about a second water tower not being needed because there was or was not going to be development there. Mr. Mills has made it clear that second tank is needed and necessary for reasons that don't have to do with development or redevelopment of that southeast quadrant.
Thank you, Alderman. Further discussion?
Sure, Mayor.
Sure. Alderman Massey, you have the floor.
So the issue is not whether or not it really comes down to how you define needed. I mean, there are other ways of addressing these needs rather than having this water tower. Now, we can debate the advantages and disadvantages of each of those alternatives, but the public and the board were never really given the chance to discuss the alternative. It was just the choice between you either build the water tower or you build the water tower. In other words, there was no real choice. We were told that the water tower needed to be approved, and if we didn't approve it, then we were against public safety, which in my opinion just wasn't true. And so while at some point people might benefit from the water tower, they might also benefit from the alternatives that could have been used. And to suggest that the water tower isn't being built to support the additional growth that's planned for Forest Hill Heights, in my opinion, is not correct, because if you look at the public records that I got through the public information request, you'll find that the water tower, the additional water lines, the larger water lines were all planned in response to the build out of Forest Hill Heights. So will the water tower provide some benefit? It probably will, but my point is that there were alternatives that could provide similar benefits. And right now, we don't know when those other projects are going to get online in Forest Hill Heights. And so to spend a few $1 million for this water tower at this time seems a little quick to me. I think we need to see how things play out over the next few months at least, if not years, and see what the progress in Forest Hill Heights actually looks like before those neighborhoods are forced to have this water tower constructed outside their neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Any further discussion?
Yes, I would like to.
Yes, Alderman Yonda. Vice Mayor Yonda, you have the floor, sir.
Mayor, I would like to ask Mr. Mills how long he has been suggesting we have this water tower.
Director Mills, if you'd like to elaborate on maybe a little bit of the history of the water tower dating back to 85 and moving forward.
Yes, Mayor, you're correct. 85 was my first experience, and that's the year I started working for the city, and we were seeking to site a water tower in 1985. We've made other attempts over the years, and just very pleased for the system to have that resiliency and that redundancy that we need with this second elevated tower. It will certainly help my night's sleep. I promise you that.
Thank you, Director. Further questions or discussion, Alderman Yonda?
Mr. Mills, Mayor, would you ask Mr. Mills, did we not receive presentations on the different alternatives that were presented to the aldermen and also available to our citizens as far as pumping stations and overhead towers?
Director Mills, and I think there may have been a work session as well at some point in the last year and a half. Go ahead, Director Mills.
Yes, Mayor, that's correct. We did have a work session, and at that work session, we used some engineering data to look at the possibility of pump stations and how they might be impacted. But as I shared at that point in time, our city's water system was not designed with the idea to have pump stations. We did not secure the land. We did not lay our mains in a fashion that would support having various pump stations throughout our city. We based our system on elevated water, decisions that were made long before I came to work for the city of Germantown.
Thank you, Director. Vice Mayor, you have the floor.
Yes, I'd just like to say I have no intention of cutting public safety issues, police, fire, this water tower. I think it's important that we have it. The Environmental Commission voted unanimously towards it. We have been talking about it for years and years. It's time to move forward. This is the preliminary startup for it. I'm going to be voting for it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Gibson?
Yes.
Alderman Massey?
No.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Yonda?
Yes.
Alderman Sanders?
Yes.
The motion carries and is approved, and we appreciate your support. The administration does. Thank you, Board of Mayor and Aldermen, for your support on that measure. We have reached the conclusion of our meeting this evening. I personally thank the board for excellent discussion, great questions, and a very good sense of decorum. Thank you so much, and we are adjourned. Good night, Germantown.